It is my pleasure now to introduce the next discussion. And the next discussion is called Lessons Learned from Early Adopters. As I mentioned in the beginning, in my opening remarks, there are some folks that are already undertaking this in government. David Kirk is the digital labor lead for KPMG's Shared Services and Outsourcing Advisory Practice, and he's going to lead this discussion that features Paul Bartley of Becton Dickinson, my friend and colleague Justin Herman, who I spoke to on Government Matters last night, and Glenn Davidson of the Department of Commerce. I hope you'll make them feel as welcome as you've made me feel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave Kirk. And then thank you, Francis, for the introductions. So I've been in the technology world now for, admittedly, over 30 years. And Glenn, you can refrain from giving exact numbers. And I said, with possibly the exception of the internet, I'm not sure I've ever seen the justified excitement that there is around the advances in automation and artificial intelligence. I was doing artificial intelligence back in the 80s, and it's just, it's amazing to me now what it now means and the reality of it. But with that buzz and excitement, I think, as Francis mentioned in the opening remarks this morning, everyone's jumping in at record speeds, head first, foot first, any way you can get in. And I think with that, there tends to be a tendency for us to all make the same mistakes, and for us maybe even painfully to all learn the same lessons, right? So the intent of today's panel is to share some of those lessons to maybe better enable those of you in the audience along your journey, and for us to learn as well what our colleagues are doing and seeing. So I've put together a short list of lessons learned. It wasn't easy. It wasn't hard to come up with like 6 to 8 already. But before we even leverage those, what I'd like to do is give each panelist the opportunity to further introduce themselves, also discuss what their organization's doing in the area of intelligent automation, and then share with us one or more of their key lessons learned along the way. So Paul, maybe I'll start with you down the end. We'll work our way this way. If you could kind of share with us, what your experience has been so far.
Sure, thanks a lot. Just first, a little bit of background about me. I am with Becton Dickinson, which is a medical device and supply company. You're wondering, why is he up there? We're a government here. I spent 9 years running shared services at Health and Human Services. So that was only a year ago. I've been in my new role about 10 months. So pretty versed on how things work in government as well. My company happens to be out in front on the level 1 RPA. You guys heard earlier, Kurt went through the classes 1, 2, and 3. We are firmly in class 1. We utilize a solution called Automation Anywhere. We've been at this since about September of 2 years ago, so close to 2 years of experience with it. We've got 37 bots running today and many more under development. So if you remember from the slide earlier today, class 1 is the cutting and the pasting. It's the swivel chair. We're not solving the world's problems or doing great analytic thinking with our computers. We are doing things that we don't want humans to do anymore. It's cutting here and pasting here. It's screen scraping here and putting into another system. One of the ways that we use RPA is in order entry. So we're a medical technology company. We have customers that want to buy stuff from us. We do that all over the world, and there's many different ways to buy our products. One of the ways is to send an email to us. And prior to RPA, we had humans pulling up those emails, looking at what they're ordering, and entering that into SAP, which is our ERP system. As you can imagine, very time-consuming. There's errors. People like to go home at night, take breaks, that type of thing. So we thought there's got to be a better way to do this. The RPA solution is perfect for situations where you are doing a very simple thing over and over and over. If you're talking about complex things, that's not class 1. That may be class 3, and maybe we'll get into that later in the panel. But for now, our sweet spot are processes that require just rote mechanical, cutting, pasting, moving information from one system to another. And if I remember from my government days, we have no lack of systems, right? And they don't always talk to each other. So you can pay an integrator or a technology firm to create an interface, or you can do it yourself with RPA, and that's what we're doing. It's very flexible. We've got a team of 5 who are versed in this now. I think some of them actually do have technology backgrounds, but it's not required. This solution, as well as the other big players in the area, have designed it so that it's simple to use. It's step by step by step. If you're cutting from this field on one screen and pasting into this field on another screen, you just tell the machine to do that, and then it does that the same way every single time. So we can get more into some of the lessons learned, but I'll let Glenn talk about what his background.
Great. So I'm a former KPMGer who joined the federal government almost 2 years ago, inspired by my friend Paul Bartley. And that was to join the U.S. Department of Commerce to launch really the first cabinet-level department's multi-function, enterprise-wide shared services model. And I say that because while Paul worked for Health and Human Services Program Support Center, we're handling not just acquisition, but also HR, finance, IT, and other even mission-focused related services for 12 bureaus, 12 highly federated bureaus, and the Office of the Secretary, and about 50,000 people. So it's a very complex related issue. I'm going to follow. Unlike Paul, I'm at the beginning of the journey. We're at the beginning of our transformation journey, and where I think we're doing all the right things to ultimately enable intelligent automation within the department. And that is, first and foremost, it's all the disparate systems. If I told you that we had 44 separate tools for HR, we have 4 legacy systems for finance, we have 3 legacy systems for acquisition, and I can go on, right? So we're challenged with that, and obviously just beginning our migration to various common platforms. But we're spending a lot of time in transforming the processes, and that's really the first step. One of the questions that David asked me before, which is, are you standardizing on the processes, or are you mapping the current processes and then moving to a future state? I said, no, actually, what we're doing is we are creating future state processes and forcing the standardization before we ultimately begin to do anything else, right? So if I looked at it, we've got 12 disparate bureaus, 12 different types of processes. Why would we map those? So it's complicated, our transformation, but at the end of the day, that's the first thing that we've done. And then as it relates to tools, right? For me, it is where we've got the eye on the future, right? We obviously want to be as digital as we possibly can. We want to be as transparent with the types of transaction work that we're doing. And then clearly we want to be in a position to implement robotics, to be able to actually help with compliance, to get rid of our error rates, to ultimately improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the delivery of those services. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Justin?
Hi, I'm Justin Herman. I come to you today from the fiery depths of the bureaucracy, which you have heard much of today. So what I do is I lead emerging citizen technology for the General Services Administration. What that is, and it's a newly launched program specifically to work with agencies and U.S. businesses to identify what are those emerging technologies that are at a tipping point, that we know that there's a business case, we know that there's probably data available to support solutions on it, but that no policies, guidance, past performances exist. So we have to create that way. And so right now we're leading efforts coordinating artificial intelligence for citizen services. If you check out Fed News Radio today, they just broke that we are launching a government-wide blockchain initiative this summer as well. When I suppose we're supposed to be keeping our head low right now, but that's not really the style. I also serve on the White House's National Science Technology Council Subcommittee for Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence. So pretty much for the last half of a year, I've been working very closely with agencies on what are those cases, what are those business needs around automation, for instance, AI, machine learning, and I've seen the sublime to the ridiculous and experienced it, as you can imagine. Everything from going into an agency and somebody shares some Gizmodo article their crazy Uncle Billy shared with them on Facebook about the singularity, to right down to, truly across the board is where the conversation is. So what we try to do is we try to get together, create shared services, interagency conversations to be like, okay, let's really start kicking the tires of this. Let's have these evaluations and really refine what are those business needs, and how can we articulate them publicly in a way that opens it up so U.S. businesses can come in and provide these solutions to public services. So right now, what we're doing is we're wrapping up actually our first pilot program through this new program. And the pilot is specifically working with around 36 agencies to use pre-existing data into intelligent personal assistants. We're working with Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, Facebook, and also this wonderful accelerator that you're going to hear about later, Decode 42. So when you see Meg up on stage, please shout her out for me. So thank you. Looking forward to questions, by the way.
Appreciate that. All right. So I'll start with the fun topic, a topic that comes up a lot when we're working with clients. So robotics, so let's focus on classes 1 and 2, and it's an attractive capability for the business. As I believe Paul went into, it doesn't necessarily require coders, right? So these tools are set up to do drag and drop kind of configuration. And what becomes attractive to the business very quickly is, hey, I can go off and I can do this. I can do this without having to jump in the back of that very long IT queue that seems to bog me down every time I have this great idea about how I can enable and better empower my business, right? At the same time, there are a lot of folks that will advocate, and I have to admit I'm one of them, that there is a role for IT, right? And so what I'd like to put out there is I think it's important to recognize this isn't an ERP implementation. It doesn't take us years to go out and do some of this. At the same time, there are fundamental things like configuration management that IT's been doing for years, and guess what? That keeps the bot working. So I don't build the bot 1 month, and a month later it's like, oh yeah, well some system changed and now the bot doesn't work. So I would propose that maybe there is a role for IT, but I'd like to hear from the folks that have been out doing this, in their organization. So Paul, why don't you start? I know you had some thoughts about this.
This is really the democratization of IT in a sense, and it kind of bugs the IT people sometimes because they don't control it. These bots are $10,000 each. This is not an ERP implementation with hundreds of millions of dollars and steering committees and governance. You definitely need governance, and you need a firm foundation, especially when it comes to security. These bots are cutting and pasting and moving around your system. You definitely want to know what they're doing.
And they have IDs and logins, just
exactly.
like people, right?
Another interesting thing about this whole technology is the humanization of it. If you think about the words we've been hearing this morning, intelligence and robots, and you're thinking of your favorite movie character that's a robot, we've humanized this technology, and there's reasons why we've done that. Part of it is that we treat them, they get a login. At my company, we name them. I've seen companies put them on their organizational charts as FTEs. So this can get kind of crazy, but it's strange. When the ATM machine came out, we didn't name it a certain human name. We treated it like a machine.
You don't name your ATM machine?
No, and I don't run a bank, but that's not what they chose to do. So the marketing here and the placement is very interesting. I would argue that humanization makes it easier to talk to IT. Most folks in IT are grand thinkers, and they're trying to create these systems that all talk to each other and it's all connected, and this is not that type of technology. This is something that steps in and does a very simple task, and it can do many, many different tasks that you may not even be aware of at your level in the organization. You've got to empower the people at the very bottom of the totem pole who can make their work easier. And as soon as they can get trained on this stuff, and as soon as you can put some parameters in place, they can get busy making things more efficient.
Justin or Glenn, any thoughts on IT's role?
I'll tell you, the magic word for us is augmentation on this. So what really spurred me getting involved with this is So we got pulled in. There was an emergency that was happening at a local level in a state, and we got asked to help create a digital operations center for them on the fly. And what we found is we were able to build these things very quickly, and we had access to technology that allowed us to see in real time, 30,000 questions and requests for help coming in. But what was lacking is the ability to make it actionable and digestible. And those are the two words here. Because of the success of digital government and people choosing digital services to access their public services, what happened is the ability and the technology in order to make proper use of it did not keep up at the time. And so what happens is, especially like from the IT perspective, is I'll have conversations with agencies, and I won't mention the words automation or things like that, trigger words, and we'll talk about it, and they go, well, this is a problem we've known for a while, and this is fantastic we're able to do it, because that's exactly it, is that the mission need and the problems have been existing forever. You know what I mean? Those aren't new. It's IT that has caught up, finally, allowing us to tackle it in new ways, and I think that's one of the real jumping points and opportunities here, is because, yes, there is the new technology and IT at the table, but in order to connect to people and connect to missions, we've got to focus on that, you know what I mean, which is the cultural aspect and the mission need.
Well, so Paul mentioned in his earlier discussion that a lot of times a terrific application of technology like RPA is when you have several legacy systems. From a business perspective, now you have a way of creating a solution that's automated without having to rely on detailed, complicated application interfaces being written by the IT shop. So it allows you to go out and configure this, and even if it's a stopgap that you're going to use for the next 2 or 3 years, when you can roll things out in a matter of a day or week that automates and connects those legacy systems together, as opposed to in the back of that IT queue, it makes it very attractive to the business. But I definitely believe, we mentioned that there's logon IDs and passwords that are involved. You're giving these bots, humanizing them, but also giving them capabilities that you need to protect with information security. And you also, like I said earlier, you need to make sure that they aren't work a month later. And so there are fundamental things that IT's been doing for years that I think support it. But a tagline we used at one of my clients was driven by the business, powered by IT, right? Kind of an approach.
So Dave, our approach is a little bit different in that we're spending very little time and attention on the tools, because the way that we are actually delivering services is working with our vendor partners. At the end of the day, I am buying a service. And so for me, it doesn't really matter where the facility is, it doesn't matter what the technology, it doesn't even matter how many people are actually going to deliver that service. So what I'm trying to do is we may start at firm fixed fee, but at the end of the day, this is going to be by the drink, right? So by the transaction. Sure. And ultimately, we're going to continue to drive down the cost of each transaction. So if I told you that for a personal action request, we're now charging $78.82, on average for a par, next year it'll be 75. The next year it'll be under 70. So largely what I'm trying to do is drive my vendor community ultimately to introduce these new tools and technologies ultimately to support us.
That's a great point, and you get into terminology such as knowledge as a service or automation as a service, where you don't need to worry about that. You're buying that capability, and there are offerings out there where they'll do exactly that. They will automate processes and then maintain that automation for you, and you buy it by the drink. And that's a great lead-in, Glenn, to another question. I know you have a significant background in shared services. I know you mentioned it earlier that that's what your focus is right now. Perhaps you could share a few thoughts around the idea of centralizing the intelligent automation of these processes and getting the benefits that you get out of a shared service, as opposed to what we see sometimes with organizations where each pocket of the organization is off doing their own thing, playing with their own tool, trying to get trained, and it seems to be very inefficient.
Well, and that will continue. It's really interesting. I'll go back to Paul's original comment. It's largely about governance. The way that we crafted this, and I'm very happy about it, is that we have a departmental management council. It's the most senior career individuals within each bureau, as well as a few politicals at the Office of the Secretary level. And these are the people that are making decisions on behalf of the entire department and who are supporting me, right? They're my enterprise services governance board, effectively. And so as we learn about people playing with new tools and new devices and new technologies overall, it's nice to be aware of it, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to kind of curb that activity so that we do it at least in a shared services model. And I'm very careful to say that shared services to me is not centralization, it's not consolidation. The way that we ultimately did this was really redefine the way that we each function operated. And that was to actually determine which activity within a single process or function belonged, whether it be in our enterprise services model or whether it be in the bureaus or whether it be its central office, right? So at the end of the day, we look at, I'll use HR as the example, our Chico is responsible for strategy, compliance, and policy, right? End of story, that's it. Our bureau people are responsible for what I would consider this higher value HR-related activities like workforce planning and retirement counseling, those that are high touch. And then all the other transaction-related work for the department is now migrating into enterprise services. So this gives me the opportunity to have enough volume, enough activity to actually invest in new technologies and new tools to be able to do that.
Yep. Justin, you want to add to that?
It's something in discussion on shared services. Some of my favorite meetings of the week recently have always been with Federal Acquisition Services, who are working very hard right now to get ahead of this. We're discussing everything from models around cognition as a service, essentially to be able to not only tackle the contracting process itself with automation and AI, but also to make sure that the proper vehicles exist. And so it's both easy for new businesses to be able to offer their services, it's easier for government agencies to evaluate and procure these services. So these are all things, I promise you, that are happening right now. Which makes it so two things. There's only two things I know. One, Big Bang Theory is the worst show on television. And two, that everything that we're talking about, the future of things, is coming like right now.
So you're
And it is pretty bad too.
But you're a big fan of Big because you've mentioned that a couple times on Call It Big Bang. I know you wanted
I'm passionate about two things: automation and not liking that show.
He wanted a prompt for that, and I was like, I'm not sure how I get to the Big Bang Theory when I'm talking about intelligent automation, but you did it anyway. So congratulations.
I'm hoping to issue a white paper on it soon.
Paul, any thoughts on centralization and what should or shouldn't be, or the trade-offs?
Yeah, I would just say the class 3 and the machines taking over is fun to think about. I haven't seen it yet, and I got to tell you this don't pass over class 1 waiting for class 2 and 3 to get here. This thing can really work for you. I think shared services is the logical place for this. If you Google RPA or process automation or intelligent automation, up in the results will be shared services. And if you look at the people that are putting on the conferences and holding the events, even KPMG, it's very closely tied to shared services. And I always wondered, why is that? Why does this group care so much about this? I work for a manufacturing company, and there's actually a lot of applications for robotics, this type of robotics, not the manufacturing type, but the knowledge worker type robotics in our manufacturing facilities, but they're not going with it. And what I figured out is it's those definitions of the processes. We have taken our processes and laid them out. We've defined them. In some cases, we've made them the same across the organization. But trust me, private sector is just like government. It's got 1 million systems, and we just bought a company. We're buying another company this fall. All different systems that need to be integrated. So this solution comes along, and the shared services folks are the ones that think in this way. They think process. They think, how do we make things work together? How do we make them efficient and faster? You mentioned the cost each year going down. That's how we're hardwired. That's how we think. So I think it's a logical place to put something like this. I guess if I was setting up my own perfect world, I would put a competition together, and that's how Becton Dickinson came up with our vendor. We actually had 4 vendors create an answer to the problem that we had of this. It was an order entry issue, and Automation Anywhere came out on top. They figured out how to do it the best way, and we looked into some other aspects. The licensing is important, how they charge, the sustainability. Is it going to work across? Is it okay in finance? Does it work in HR? There's a lot of aspects of this that you want to think about when you choose your vendor. But it's a great time right now because there's so many startups, so many groups that are getting into this that you can basically get them to do it for free and show you what they've got and then choose one.
So Dave, let's talk about cost for a minute, since Paul brought it up, which is, in part, I mean, let's think about what drove shared services in the first instance, right? And it was largely in the private sector. It was cost, right? Mm-hmm. Cost reduction, right? What drove offshoring, right? In the private sector was obviously about cost. What's driven robotics, right? As the labor pools become more and more expensive offshore, right? Cost, right? So I look at it I feel I'm the beneficiary ultimately. Working in government, I'm not clearly never going to offshore anything. I do constantly look for areas or markets where there is a lower cost of labor and there are lower facility costs. But at the end of the day, my biggest issue is actually attracting and retaining talent. Right? For the work that we do, especially for this type of transaction work. So, if I can give, higher value work to the people that work for me, and obviously use robotics for getting rid of some of the more mundane related activities, I should.
Yeah,
and that's driving us.
It's a great point because, of course, everyone always laser focused on cost. Yeah. We've got several slides that we put together saying, look, there's a lot more to this than just cost. There's predictability. There's the ability to eliminate human error and improve your quality. And as Glenn just said, it's and Kirk elaborated on this morning. It's about augmenting the work. If I take activities from a person that's very mundane and they get very little value and it's just literally doing this and this and cutting and pasting and stare and compare, and I give them something meaningful to do, they're going to be more satisfied as an employee. They're going to like their job better because they're being challenged. They're getting a chance to do something that's more than just looking at a screen and saying, yes, that number is the same as that number, right? So you get a lot of benefits from intelligent automation that aren't just about cost. Clearly, cost should be seen as one of them, but there are 6 or 7 other benefits to this that you have to take into consideration. And that's actually one of the lessons learned, beginning to go on and elaborate right now or not, but is to kind of understand what your goal is. Because we've gone down this path to have people later scratching their head going, well, I don't see how we're saving money. Well, we didn't start this journey to save money. We started this journey because we keep on having an unacceptable error rate, right, in the process we're currently doing. And Glenn mentioned earlier the idea of, like, hey, let's not automate the process we're currently doing. Maybe it makes more sense to be automating the process we should be doing, right? So let's fix it first and then automate it, right? So any comments on that?
Let me tackle that real quick, because you may have been thinking when I said people email us orders, we manually type them into SAP, let's put a bot on that. Is that really the best way to go about this? And the answer is no. We're using bots as pothole fillers, and I'll tell you in a second what I mean by that. But this is a stopgap solution. The real answer is to create an online order system so our customers come right in, they enter, they choose from drop downs, and it goes right into SAP. That's the correct answer. But is that coming tomorrow or next week or next month? That's probably a 2 or 3 year project, back to the millions and millions. So when I say pothole filler, this is something that my boss came up with. When you build a road, you get the big machines out, the concrete, the highway. Pothole fillers are there for that pothole that just, it's persistent and you got to get past it, and hopefully it's only going to be a year and they'll come back through and pave the road again. That's how we use our bots. And I think there's plenty of opportunity in government and in other organizations for that. It's definitely not something you want to do long term. If your plan is, I'm going to get some bots to run for the next 10 years, you have the wrong solution.
People go as far as to call it disposable. Sometimes there's a disposable solution.
You may reposition it on a different process, but if your plan is for that to be your long-term solution, it's probably not the right one. You've got to think a little bit more strategically.
Yeah, looking at a particular business case that we're approaching right now. So it's called the no wrong door approach that we're looking at. So when we're looking to intelligently automate call centers, web forms, bots, emails. So no matter how somebody is engaging, there's one unified, intelligent backend that can make actionable and digestible what it is, however somebody chooses to communicate. And so just right there, but that's pothole fillers, like you said, because the idea is that eventually people don't have to pick up the phone, or people don't have to do X, Y, and Z, that we're creating, once we have that information, we have that unification, in order to be able to make it so people have the minimum amount of output. You know what I mean? They're giving the minimum amount of information, and intelligently they're getting the maximum amount of return from it. And that's really the exciting potential.
So David, you asked what's our goal in this, and honestly, it's probably more around accuracy and cost. We're really not looking to drive a lot of humans out of the process. Going back to what you were saying earlier, we see this technology as a way to motivate our employees. Instead of doing a mind-numbing task, during year-end close or month-end close, now the machine does that, and you're doing analysis instead. So I would say, over time, we will hire less people, but we're not letting anybody go because a robot came in.
So I would love RPA. That sounds fantastic. I mean, we could use that. So the benefits sitting there are just amazing.
Yeah, and user customer satisfaction, another great motivator. We did a proof of concept with a client where all 3 bots that we created, in the end, we took a look at them and realized that none of them were about saving money. That in all 3 cases, they were taking a task that this organization's end user would have to do if they didn't do it. By automating, they didn't save themselves any money, but they avoided the end customer from having to do this very manual, laborious task of getting all this data and plugging it into these systems, right? So happier end user, right? There weren't cost savings involved, right? But a happier end customer, right? So there are a lot of different. So maybe we shift for a second. We talked a lot about the robotics in Class 1. It's very exciting. Again, I'll admit that back in the 80s, I worked on artificial intelligence, and back then we wrote and built knowledge systems the hard way. So we would sit down with an expert, interview them, and then capture all this intelligence in using Prolog and Lisp and languages like this, which was really great. And then you could ask these expert systems questions, and they would answer them. And about 6 months later, they were dumb again because things had changed. And guess what? Your code isn't being modified every day. One of the exciting things and advances in artificial intelligence today is the ability for these systems to learn on their own. True machine learning, where they're constantly sampling data and getting more and more knowledge. And that helps keep the data from being outdated. I know, Justin, you mentioned that you're doing some work in AI as well. What are your thoughts on machine learning and its role in having a successful cognitive automation?
This could be an entire day discussion. I know. Really on that. We have so much data, and the thing is there's so much we're leaving on the table. It's absolutely stunning, and I don't think anybody works in government or is passionate about a mission that doesn't go home at the end of the day thinking just how much more we could have accomplished if there was really ways in which to handle this. And just what you said is the ability for machine learning to be able to adapt and grow with more of this information. It prevents that cycle of I think, what was it, like 10 years ago, they talk about the life cycle of technology and how quickly, by the time I get a blog post approved to even talk about what we're doing, it's already old news. And so I think the future, and we have the information, we have the food and the fuel for machine learning. It's just a matter of, and something you touched before, there's so many options on the table. It's making sure we're choosing right on that, because what do they talk about? There's an allegory about the wolf that you feed is the one that you become. So it's like, are we getting ourselves built into a system that then perhaps we can't get out of, and so that's why we have to make these decisions, because once you get on the path, machine learning, things are growing, we want to make sure that we're raising that right.
Right. Well, a major advancement that has helped in this category is the progress that was made with natural language processing and the ability to understand not just data that's in databases and spreadsheets, but data that's in text and paragraphs and articles and journals. And when you consider, you mentioned the data, all the data that we're wasting, and I'll get these numbers, I think, pretty close, that 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years, and 80% of that data is unstructured.
Yep.
So it's in paragraphs, it's on social media, it's in journal articles. You have Watson Oncology able to go out and consume medical journals and actually make sense of that, and to continuously be updating its ability to deal with cancer, right? And I think that's one of the significant advances that has really empowered this. And I'm not sure there's any thoughts on natural language processing.
Well, one of the things we're doing right now, because it's not just buying services or talking about business cases, it's making sure that government is hosting and structuring its data in such a way that makes it easy.
Right. That's even
For
better.
Google and researchers to be able to consume and then apply into these systems. One of the things that we're doing for our our pilot program for AI personal assistants is just that, is creating a new resource document, which are API standards. So agencies know, because there's a lot of magical thinking going on here. Boom, we know we have the data. Boom, we know we want this automated or intelligent system to happen. People think a finger is going to snap, and all of a sudden magic happens, and it's there. And part of it too is, like, again, we have to create those new data standards in order to open it up and to be able to feed these technologies.
Yeah.
So for me, the real opportunity is not only just the elimination of errors, high error rates, but it's knowledge transfer, which is very difficult for any of us to do. And it's the knowledge transfer between retiring people and the newcomers, right? If I shared with you that 30% of our business support functions people are eligible to retire today, that makes incredible concern for me.
Yeah.
But the big story here is that while I'm focused primarily on the back office, 40% of all federal data comes from the U.S. Department of Commerce, right? That's trade data, that's census data, that's standards data, and it goes on and on. And so we are beginning to at least have that conversation about how do we, one, make something out of all of that data, right? Look at it as an integrated source. And that's where AI can really come in handy.
Yep.
I just think it's a really exciting time, the way interesting statistic about data and how we can mine it, how we can use it. I drove down from Rockville today and used an app called Waze, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. That's using data, all these cars driving on the road trying to figure out the fastest way to get me here. That wasn't around 2-3 years ago. This is using data that's existing and structuring it and making it useful. And government, I'd be curious to know what percent of your number actually resides in government. And the people in this room have some of the greatest opportunities to do things with data. I'll give you an example of one that I heard of about a year ago. The city of New York, when the fire alarm goes off and the trucks start rolling, in the cab of the fire truck now is a computer that feeds data from the rest of the city. Is there a daycare near that location where the fire is? What about propane tanks? Any licenses for propane tanks? And when the firemen get to the fire, they already have this great intel knowing, hey, we got to get these kids out of here, or don't go back in that third room, there's a propane tank in there. So this is all within our grasp. It's just getting the ideas, first of all, but then the machinery to do it. And I think at this stage, the technology is there. We just need to apply it.
I think we can have an entire panel discussion about data, just about and what it is today, what the Internet of Things is going to do to it tomorrow. Just the vehicle information that you mentioned. Now you have smart cars and things of this nature. The data world is going to change radically, and it's literally another 45-minute discussion easily. I'm going to switch gears a second and go back to lessons learned around tool selection. So, Kirk talked about the 3 classes that we use at KPMG to help differentiate the kinds of tools. And we're always very cautious when we talk about those classes to ensure it's not about a maturity curve. It's not about, these guys aren't there yet. They're going to get more towards class 3. It's about mapping the right tool to the right problem, right? Because you don't need to use Watson to do cut and paste off of 2 different legacy systems. Right. So could you, Paul, I know you talked about you're using automation anywhere. What was your journey like in saying, well, here's my problem. Where do I begin as far as tool selection? Because obviously, as I choose a technology, no tool does it all. And so, do you have multiples down the line? Do you see that as a future,
I'm not ready to predict that future, but I can tell you about the past. And how this came about is we're a worldwide company. We have a shared services center in Singapore. And it was one of those things where somebody goes to a conference and hears about this great thing and let's try it out. And that's when we had our bake-off, the four groups. As a company, we tend to, just like government, we want to compete things. We want to get the best price and the best product. There were a number of aspects that we thought about. I mentioned earlier the licensing. Are you paying per bot? Are you paying per year? Are you paying per user? There's a lot of ways you can charge, and each company does it a little bit differently. Yep. Are you looking for a solution that works really well with SAP or Oracle or something else? The vendors can help you, and maybe you can do your own research on which ones work better with which ones. So those are the types of things that we looked at when we did our selection.
But you knew class one was where you needed to be for the problem you had?
Absolutely.
Okay.
What we're after, I've said this before, basic problems, cutting, pasting. We're not trying to boil the ocean right now. I would argue that RPA is not the right solution for a big project. It's many small projects that add up to a lot of big savings.
Yep. And Glenn, I know you are a little more tool agnostic because you want to buy things as a service. Any thought on when you're looking for service, are you looking more for things eventually that'll be cognitive as well and those kind of capabilities, or more the fundamental automation for mundane tasks that you discussed?
Well, as I said, we're at the beginning of the journey. First and foremost, I'm looking for my vendor partners to ultimately come with tools and technologies that we think are most suitable. My chief concern is largely about integration of those technologies, right? As best we can. Because as I said, I've got one organization that's helping me deliver HR. I have another organization that's helping me deliver acquisition. I have another one that's creating our enabling technology for our service center. So at the end of the day, if nothing else, we talked earlier about what's the role of IT. I got to make sure all of this fits together somehow.
Yeah, okay.
And that we're leveraging the best.
Okay, Justin,
What
thoughts
can
on
I say about tool selection that I haven't already said about the Big Bang Theory? An example. So one of the things is we dedicate a good chunk of time every week to meeting with businesses about it, just so we can learn the players in the space, be able to share what our requirements are, really start building that mutual relationship that we know is going to be important going forward, both with agencies and with companies themselves, though, is in the details and pitching and applying practical business cases to what you have is an ongoing challenge. For instance, we will reach out and say, listen, we're really looking right now on augmenting through automation call centers. Then all of a sudden people will come through the door and spend their time pitching this entire grand project that has a creepy human interface on it and everything. And it's like, come on, we talked about a discrete business case here that you need to address, and you're throwing in the entire kitchen sink on it. And so right now it's kind of a wild west in that sense, where there's both great opportunity, but also there's a challenge because there's not a lot of past to look back on, and everyone's very eager to get into the space. So that's one of the reasons we try to do this in the open as much as we can, have conversations, work openly with businesses, work openly with agencies, because like we had mentioned before, there's a lot of decisions happening right now, and the worst thing that could happen is that we rush into decisions that then lock us into something that it's hard to extricate from in the future.